and I'm really glad you can get over. It's a pleasure.
Thanks, Harold. Nice to talk to you again.
It is good. It's been 10 years, so a lot of water's gone under the bridge. But in any case, welcome very much to Public Access and Manhattan Network, and welcome to you in the audience. Pleasure to welcome to the program Benjamin Barber, a world-class, if I may say so, scholar who's written widely a number of books, Strong Democracy, what was it?
Jihad versus McWorld.
That was a biggie. That got around, and now you got the book Consumed out, and welcome very much to Manhattan Network Public Access. Maybe you could just briefly, Benjamin, if you would, share just your background a little bit. Born and raised, a little bit of education.
Well, I was actually born and raised right here in New York City.
All right, another New
in
York.
Manhattan, one of the few New Yorkers who actually was born here. We got a lot of folks coming in, but born and raised here, and went off to Europe for part of my education, London School of Economics, and Albert Schweitzer College in Switzerland. Did my MA and PhD at Harvard. Taught at the University of Pennsylvania, Rutgers University, Princeton.
Did the PhD in what? In political science?
Political science, government, Department of Government, yeah.
Right, okay.
Department of Government at Harvard. And then I was at Pennsylvania, University of Pennsylvania, at Rutgers, at Princeton, at the University of Maryland, and now I'm a distinguished senior fellow here in New York at Demos, which is a think tank and policy network for action and ideas right here on Fifth Avenue.
Very good. CivWorld or something is also connected?
And CivWorld is my little international NGO. It's housed at Demos, and we do every year on September 12th, the day after September 11th, an Interdependence Day in a world capital. Started in Philadelphia in 2003. From independence to interdependence, and then we were in Rome the next year, then in Paris, then in Casablanca. This year we were in Mexico City.
That's
and
right.
Next year we're going to be in Brussels.
In Brussels. Okay, that's really good. That's there. And you're still connected with the University of Maryland?
Still connected with the University of Maryland, although I'm now coming to the end of that relationship. I went there to work on a collaborative, and most of my colleagues in the collaborative have left, and since I can collaborate with myself here in New York, I don't have to be in Maryland.
I understand, and you got a lot of stuff up on YouTube, and you've been with Stephen Colbert and all kinds of people, and you're very much in the public view and that sort of thing. That's really interesting. You've written a new book. Let's talk about it. Maybe we start with it. Consumed. What's the theme of the Consumed book that you've put out more recently now?
Well, it's a book that tries to see whether the hyper-consumerism, the fact that we are consumers all the time, everywhere nowadays, is good or bad for capitalism. And my argument for capitalism. Capitalism, we know today, is the last system standing. You know, whether you're a Marxist or socialist doesn't really matter anymore. We've got to make capitalism work because it's the only system we've got.
Mr. Fukuyama said it's the end of history.
Well, he did back then. It turned out not to be the end of history, but it did turn out to be the last system standing. So the question is, can we make it work? And my argument is that it's kind of gone off the tracks now, and the excessive consumerist society we live in is a sign of how it's off the track. And Consumed is a book that tries to explore how it went off the track and how we can put it back on the track so that capitalism and democracy are once again in sync, because right now they're out of sync. Right now capitalism is hurting, not helping democracy.
Yeah, it's really interesting. It used to be called political economy. You would study political economy. You link the two. The two are intimately linked, it seems to me. Economic theory, political theory, practicality.
That's right, but they're not the same thing.
They're not. I know.
That's the problem. We've come to think in the last 30 or 40 years that if you've got a market economy, that's democracy. If you've got democracy, that means a privatized market economy, as if they were the same thing. We know, in fact, that's not true, because the most productive, energetic, entrepreneurial economic system in the world belongs to Communist China, which is also the last totalitarian political system standing. So we know, in fact, you can have an authoritarian, even a totalitarian political system in conjunction with a free market economy. So the two aren't the same thing, but we've come to think of them as that, and I think what we need to do is examine how capitalism is impacting democracy and how we might make capitalism into a more democratic system than it is.
That's really interesting to me. I have a sidebar, perhaps, but I just watched Mr. Hu talk to the system in China, and he was touting Karl Marx, and he was saying, we are a socialist country, we are the socialist revolutionary vanguard of this world, and so forth, still claiming the mantle of socialism. It looks awfully like capitalism to me, as I look at it from
I think they like to talk about the ideology on the political side, but of course on the economic side, you go to Shanghai, you go to Fuyang Province, and there's no question that this is a radically independent market economy, which in fact is to some degree out of control. It looks kind of like the American economy in the 1870s and 1880s after the Civil War.
Or Dickensian London, maybe.
Yeah, out of control. The government really has very little control of it. It's doing very well economically. It's causing ecological problems. It's causing pension problems, labor problems in China. But the real point is we have to understand is that capitalism and democracy are two different systems, and to make them work together is hard work. It doesn't just happen.
When have they ever worked together well in terms of the historical pattern or evolution of human affairs?
Well, let's use better and worse.
Okay.
And they work best, or at least better, when the market economy is under the sovereign oversight of the democratic polis. In other words, a democratic constitution that regulates and oversees the market economy makes the market economy work better. In the years after the Civil War, when capitalism really got going big time in the United States, we know that within 20 or 30 years of the new steel corporations, the new oil corporations like Standard Oil, the new railroads, and eventually the automobile industry, what we got was not competition, but monopoly.
Monopoly, yeah.
Capitalism tends to create monopolies, and it was actually the intervention of government that saved capitalism from monopoly and guaranteed competition, guaranteed entrepreneurship. It actually came with a Republican president.
Teddy Roosevelt?
Teddy Roosevelt. Then Woodrow Wilson, and then the second Roosevelt, of course, Franklin Roosevelt, and right through to the Great Society. In other words, capitalism works well when it's in a nice, solid relationship with democratic institutions. Capitalism's job is to make goods and services, give them to the public, meet their needs, and make a profit. Democracy's job is to make sure that that's done justly, that that's done not at the expense of individuals, that you have an egalitarian society, that you spread the load around, that you don't socialize risk and privatize profit, which is what's happened today, but that in fact you make sure that they take responsibility in the private sector for what they do, and that we in the public sector take responsibility for the public consequences. That's a good balance. We haven't had that balance, at least since Reagan Thatcher, at least since the privatization ideology of the 1980s began to undermine that partnership between democracy and capitalism. And in the last 30 or 40 years, we've seen a radically privatized society, a radically commercialized society, and a society, as a result, I argue in this book, that's also infantilized.
Infantilizing the adults.
Infantilizing the adults.
And the youth.
If you want to sell goods to people who don't need them or want them, you need to create from adults impetuous, desirous children who say, gimme, gimme, gimme. I want, who act like children. And that has been what marketing has been about for the last 20 or 30 years.
Vance Packard wrote The Hidden Persuaders and other things on that. Did a program with him some time back.
Well,
he wrote really well on that way, how they can manipulate the consciousness, particularly through these new ways of communicating with the population, including television and multimedia and so forth.
Vance Packard's Hidden Persuaders have come out of the closet.
They're
not hidden. They're not hidden anymore. They're right out front and center, and they're not ashamed of what they're doing. They're saying we want to get the gatekeepers out of the way. That's parents. Get the parents out of the way of the children so we can market the children, and turn the parents into children so we can market to them as well. They're explicit about that. They're doing that. And that suggests how capitalism has gone off the track, because here's the real argument of the book. Capitalism was born as a system which put together private profit and altruism. It said the following: if you produce goods and services that people really need, they'll buy them, you'll serve society, and you will make a profit. That hitched, in a sense, selfishness and altruism together. What's happened today is, partly because capitalism has succeeded in meeting the needs, at least of the middle class in the developed world, certainly not the underdeveloped world.
In the developed world, which is maybe, what, 20% of the world?
20%, and in the developed part of the developed world.
Right,
we have plenty of folks here. But for that part of the world, a lot of the needs have been met. But those are the folks, the people in the developed world have the money.
So that's the market. That's the
where the market
target.
is. And they go after the market, but they can no longer do it by selling goods that people need or want, because most of their needs and wants have been done. So today, instead of manufacturing goods to meet real needs, the market's involved in manufacturing needs to sell all the goods that it's got to sell, whether or not we need them, whether or not we want them. And that, of course, also provides an impetus to infantilize adults, to target children, to get all kinds of people involved in market, and not just to market, for the 7 hours a day that we might shop during the day, but day and night, 24/7, year round the clock. Sundays have disappeared. No shopping zones are gone. We advertise everywhere. We market everywhere, in films, on the internet, in the malls, in airplanes, in airports, in train stations.
In our films with product placement and that kind of thing, and they're all behind it. Not only the public relations, but the ad agencies and so forth are past masters of that, and it has serious consequences in terms of the state of awareness or critical thinking on the part of a significant number of people within the American system.
Right. Only place it doesn't happen nowadays in the media? Right here on public access. But
thank you. I'm happy to hear the support for public access.
I do support it, but here's the problem. The reason it doesn't happen is they figure nobody's watching.
Exactly.
So they figure, oh, there's nobody else. If you actually, the more successful you
benign
are,
neglect might not be so bad in
but
this
the more
case,
successful you are and the more people do watch, the more you're going to be under pressure to, hey, we can up your production standards.
Echelon, are you hearing?
We can up your production standards, get you a much nicer studio, you know, get you in front of a much bigger audience.
They can co-opt.
But then they're going to be selling.
One thing, if I may, it's worth going, maybe veering off. We're going to get back to you. I want to stay tuned to the book. It's really good. I've read a lot of it. It's really well. You can write like a demon.
Well,
I mean, if I may say so. It's really well written and everything, with good humor and all that kind of thing. It's a very good read. People should pay attention to it. But public access is a system where they've set up, where they've got. We're just coming up negotiation with the Time Warner cable people and all that now, and it sets up a series of institutional structures where the people can come and produce and distribute, link up with the internet things that are going, and it's not a thing that has to be a business relation for the producer. They come here and they got a sign on the wall that says no money need be exchanged here ever. So it can be done free because the costs of what's involved are done in that franchise. That's a unique niche and makes possible like a Hyde Park corner notion in terms of communication for the citizens who are not professional communicators.
You're right. It's a great idea, and the same thing is true of the internet. I mean, anybody can put up a blog.
They link.
Anybody can begin to do that. Here's the problem, though. We know that money counts. It doesn't just count because people can buy and sell each other. It counts because production standards, production quality, access to audience, and so on, all depends on the dollars you spend. And this is a terrific show, and you have serious people, and you've been doing it for a long time, but it's going to be very hard for you to compete with Charlie Rose, not because you don't ask as good questions as Charlie asks, maybe better, but because he's got behind him a massive marketing operation and tool that's part of a consumer society, and just a little bit of what public access did, they said enticingly to America, you let us cable your communities, we're going to give you some cable networks that are open to the public. You come in and we'll give you a studio and do your thing. But the assumption behind that was that for no money at all, you can somehow compete with Disney, you can compete with Gates, you can compete with Microsoft and so on. And the fact is, it's not just about production quality and the quality of what you say and the people you have on. It's about production standards, it's about marketing, it's about getting to an audience out there, and that's a whole lot tougher. You're assuming the old market model, which is we put it out there, and in a demand economy, if people want it, people watch and say we like it. The reality is, of course, people buy what's being recommended to them, what they hear about, what's being written about, what's being marketed to, and the reality is public access is not in that league.
No, but just wait, it will be. I think there's great hope in the public access.
I'm all with you, that's why I'm here, and I very much hope that's going to happen.
I appreciate you coming in, because you're a voice for democracy.
But exactly, and public access is deeply democratic,
it
and
is.
Terrifically so, and you've been on for a very long time.
Since the Pleistocene, I believe. We moved icebergs to get the cameras set up.
You were first on, I think, in a loincloth, and now you're dressed in modern dress.
That kind of thing,
But it's a hard thing because this is a marketing society. The new industry, that's the big pay industry, is not producing goods but producing images, producing demand, producing needs, and that means we are not in a pull economy where the public out there says, we want this, give us more. We're in a push economy where stuff is being shoved at people, and the stuff that they think they want is stuff that's being pushed out.
Have they got it down, those people that work those systems for getting at the human consciousness and so forth, that target marketing and the skills that they have and able to manipulate consciousness and co-opt it perhaps and over. they're really pros.
indeed.
They're really good.
No
Marshall
question.
McLuhan used to work with some and his people, and he said that that's where the creative stuff was in the advertising, because that's where the market was, and that's where the creative went. And those ads are pretty creatively done together, and they know what they're doing. And Vance Packard documented that.
Yeah, and it's not just, by the way, it's not just advertising. Advertising is the weak end, the old end. I mean, the new stuff they do, they don't advertise because a lot of people aren't going to pay much attention to that, particularly young people. They do things like what's called, I write about this in the book, buzz marketing.
Buzz, yeah, isn't that something when they do that?
But it's funny. But
it's stealth. It's by stealth.
But it's obscene as well. They'll go to a 15-year-old. And they'll say to her, I got a great new perfume. I'll tell you what we're going to do. We're going to give you the perfume. We might even pay you something. You're going to wear it, and you're going to go around and tell your friends, hey, I found a great new perfume, as if you just found it by herself.
Yes.
Doesn't tell anyone she's being paid. Doesn't tell anyone she's working for the company. Found a great new smell it.
In fact, you can't let them know you're working for the company, because it's got to be buzz.
You ought to be wearing this perfume.
Yeah, it's really great,
And you get so-called peer-to-peer marketing. Teens talking to teens, much better than some adult advertising on television. That is obscene. It's dishonest, disingenuous. It turns our kids into liars and gets them talking to each other and using their social relations to sell them stuff in a stealth manner. That's the new market.
It may be interesting because what they're leery of, the teens and the youth are coming onto that, they're leery exactly of all the stuff that's being pushed on them. So you get it to be a buzz, because it seems to be this is the real thing, not the things that we're being bombarded with
and
by
and even the
pros.
Internet does that. The Internet makes it feel like it's coming peer-to-peer, but very often somewhere you'll see the invisible hand, or you won't see, but you'll feel the invisible hand
reaching
of the market.
Into your pocketbook,
reaching for it. But that's, I mean, so this manufacture of needs, I'll give you an example. I was very pleased to see here, we're drinking out of nice plastic cups. Very good. Where'd you get the water from?
Right from the tap? No, I would have gotten it from the tap, but they have a system here where it's filtered through a system, makes it cold.
Oh, fine, but I mean, but it's just regular. It's regular water. But in most shows you go on, you have a bottle of water.
A bottle, because that's.
Now let me ask you
coming right out of the tap.
Let me ask you something, Harold. We spend $20 billion a year in buying bottled water in a country where rich or poor can get perfectly clean water from them taps.
I know.
And you know what? If you like it in a bottle, take an old Coke bottle or something, fill it with water, take it with you. You got a bottle of water. $20 billion.
Why is that?
What it makes, we now somehow feel that we need water from a bottle. That's the only, clean water, healthy water, good first water, who knows? But we are drinking $20 billion of water, and they are encouraging us. They're encouraging us to drink that water. In much of the world, there are billions of people without access to clean water. I have a simple suggestion. If Coca-Cola and Pepsi-Cola want to sell us water that we can get from the tap, and by the way, they buy it from wells and groundwater in Michigan and Massachusetts and Texas, where our public water comes from. So all they're doing is selling us stuff we have for free. I'm getting ready for someone to bottle air and say, here, breathe this, but you have to pay for it. Rather than doing that, rather than imposing on us and getting us to buy stuff we don't need, and in bottles that have a big carbon imprint because they have to be transported, they have to be manufactured.
It clogs up all the landfills,
Instead of doing that, why don't they go to those places that don't have adequate access to water and use their entrepreneurial skills to come up with new, innovative, ingenious products that actually help meet the need for clean water in places that don't have it.
Absolutely. Well, but that's a broader question. Why don't we have systems like Jesus and everybody intelligence serve the least among us and we don't?
Yeah, but this isn't about Jesus.
I'm
talking about money making. I'm talking about capitalism saying, let's make some real money. Let's not sell water to people who can get it for free. Let's help people who have a real need. They don't have any clean water, get clean water. And maybe we can make a killing as well, which is what capitalism wants to do. And let me tell you who's doing it. There's a company in Denmark.
Those Scandinavians,
they've made a product, a capitalist company. They're in it for profit. They don't want to be Jesus.
Good.
They want to be Bill Rockefeller, John Rockefeller, which is fine with me because what they've made is a life straw. It's about this long. It's got 9 filters in it, and those filters filter out all the known germs, bacteria, and contaminants, lead, that infect groundwater in those parts of the world where people don't access
to
decent
They've
water.
got is it the individualized
It's an individual straw. It costs about $2 to make. It lasts 12 to 18 months with one person drinking normally every day. And with that straw, it's called a life straw. With that straw, a poor person can in effect get clean water from, no matter what's there, no matter how contaminated it is, for a year or 18 months.
That's amazing. I didn't
Absolutely
know that
amazing.
existed. That's
and this company is beginning to make real money, and you know.
Okay, but somebody.
So my point is
how much does it
that's
cost
an
for
example.
the individual?
That's an example
okay, go on.
of an invention
Right.
that's in the spirit of real capitalism. It's going to help the company that made it, but it's helping the real world with a product people desperately need.
Is that like Mr. Ford selling a car at a low price so that people would be able to have the money to buy one?
Sure, well, yeah, and because also back then we needed a transportation system, an inexpensive car. Terrific. That was a needed product. Is a Hummer needed? You know, the first Fords, Model A's, Model T's, those were needed automobiles in a transportation economy that depended on the automobile. But a Hummer? Who the hell needs a Hummer? Give me a break.
Why is there such an attraction
well,
to that
because the marketing thing says, hey, be cool, be like the guys in Afghanistan and Iraq, except they're getting blown up in their Hummers and killed. But meanwhile, we can feel like all the people not going to war, not paying for our war in Iraq, can feel like big shots driving around Hollywood or New York in their Hummers. But that's an example of a completely fabricated need. But let's take it. I want to be positive, not just negative.
Yeah,
good. Let me give you another example.
Okay, but that's wonderful. That thing, I hadn't heard of that.
Yeah, that's capitalism.
Let me just ask practically, Gates or somebody, what does that cost? Because some of the people in the third world wouldn't have perhaps the price of what it costs to do that. They can't get retrovirus things for AIDS and that kind of thing because they're so poor.
The average
and how do we deal with
income
that?
of the people without water is $2 a day. So
yeah,
this costs $2. It's tough, but that's a day's wage for 18 months.
Is that what it
water?
costs? In fact, about $2. Can it be
so
made?
It's expensive, yes. But on the other hand, given what they get from it, families will pay it and are paying it. That's the problem. Is this isn't a $20 or $100 device. This is a $2 device.
You're talking about the case of the consumed, about the 20% of the 20% of within the economy that are well-to-do and so forth. They have to manufacture new needs and all that sort of thing. But the fact of the matter is maybe 60-80% of the people there's half the population less than $2 a day.
They have real needs.
So it is real needs, but they do not have.
And it's not just $2 a day. But look, let's come back to the United States.
Yeah. Okay.
We know in New Orleans, for example, we are in deep need of housing that can withstand flooding.
Absolutely.
Inexpensive housing.
No question.
We know in the San Diego, Los Angeles area, we are in need of housing that's fire resistant because more and more people are, you know, and in the global warming, more and more fires. Great capitalist opportunity. Let's develop relatively inexpensive housing that's flood resistant for the coastal areas, that's fire resistant for the chaparral areas where there's fires like that. And that's a way some smart young business person can make a ton of money and at the same time do what capitalism is supposed to do, meet real human needs. See, my point is there are real needs out there. Yes, it's a little harder because the folks who have the needs don't have as much money, but they got some. And as with Henry Ford saying, hey, I'm going to produce cheap cars so that people can afford them and, you know, we can afford to produce the cars. You got to produce goods that are relatively inexpensive. But there are also ways, and I talk about them in the book, that you can jumpstart those communities. Microfinance. Go in there and make loans to local people. Let them start their own little businesses. For example, that Life Straw, maybe down the line, they can create small local industries that produce their own life straws and take the patent for it.
That's correct.
And
maybe undercut production costs and get the cost down and let that market work.
But let me give you one more example, simple example. You were talking about retroviruses and so on, and the fact is...
Well, in general, that the population doesn't have the ability to clear the market of things that are there that can meet needs.
But here's another problem. It now turns out that the pharmaceuticals are beginning to manufacture relatively inexpensive retroviruses and other immunity system hits that help us deal with AIDS, help us deal with malaria and so on. Here's the problem. Most of the populations that are susceptible to those diseases big time live in African and Indian villages, South Asia, without electricity. Now here's the problem. All these pharmaceuticals, when they come in, they have to be refrigerated. So
I had never thought of that.
The people have to be refrigerated.
Yeah, right.
And now you've got villages with no electricity.
Right, right.
Now we can throw up our hands, or a smart young entrepreneur can say, as one has, let's get solar-powered fridges.
Really? Okay, good. See, I'm ahead of the curve.
You're right ahead of it. You should be.
I should be an entrepreneur.
Get off the show and start doing.
That's right. Get out and do something.
Make some dough here. Yeah, make some dough for yourself at the same time.
Well,
but a solar-powered small fridge in that village would allow them to store retroviruses, store pharmaceuticals, give them out over 3 to 6 months to all the kids and so on in ways that would save a lot of lives. And the person doing it, because here you only have to sell one fridge per village. You know, so you're not looking for big money to do this. but there are lots and lots of villages. In China, there are 300,000 villages. In India, there are hundreds of thousands. You could end up doing, having a volume of a couple million of these fridges and make some very nice money. The technology is there. But again, it's someone saying, let's produce goods that meet real needs.
Well, they are going to target where the money is, and there's an old saying.
Well, they are, but not if they do that. Capitalism has gone down the drain and taken democracy with us. What we have to do is figure out how that doesn't happen. So sure, they can go on short term trying to sell stuff we don't need to the people with money. But I suggest instead they sell things people do need to people with less money and help create the prosperity and the consumer base for capitalism to grow in those places and at the same time meet real human needs.
Well, I see. That's a good, interesting thing. If you were to look at some of the economic theory and so forth, whether, from Adam Smith on to Ricardo, and now you got the Friedman guys out of Chicago and all the neoliberal models and so forth, but you have Schumpeter with his creative entrepreneurialism or creative destruction, that they're going to, why isn't the market filling these, why aren't the people, the entrepreneurs, young people coming along, filling that need for the less advantaged people? Because the trends are, I'm afraid, are that everything is going to the very, very wealthy.
But the trends
Krugman says all the growth in the American economy went to the upper one after.
Hang on.
Yeah, go ahead.
The trends are there because the market is unregulated. Because it's privatized, because we are not using our democratic and public institutions to insist, for example, that you're not allowed to market to children. Sure, it's easier to market to children and sell them a lot of crap that they don't want or need than it is to go to the third world and figure out, how to do some innovation.
Yeah.
But you know what? You bar them. You tell them you don't let them. I'm sorry. You make it illegal to target children. This is the only country in the world that allows us to advertise and target kids 12, 10, 8, 6, 4, 2, 1.
Yes.
Baby first
get them
television.
In the crib. Get them in the womb. Couldn't we do something prenatal? Couldn't they get some prenatal things going into
pixels in the womb?
Yes, pixels in the womb or something like that.
That's the next stage.
Yeah, it's true. They do. Yeah.
But that's because we have relinquished our democratic oversight. We've said it's enough to be a consumer. Forget about being a citizen. And we need to reassert ourselves as citizens and say we are not going to permit capitalism to
be
dumb down adults, market to children, and ignore real needs. We can't force them to go to where the real needs are, but we can prevent them from targeting children and thus get them to move back to what they do so well when they do it, which is to answer real needs and make a profit for themselves.
We were getting back in the United States over our history and so forth. We got back to a certain point. Then came PAPCO and the breaking of the unions. The unions are less than 7% in this country now, but on a world scale, we have a whole world that we can now go out in a globalizing situation and take advantage and bring back no concern. They will compete, a race to the bottom, no concern with pollution standards, child labor's fine, whatever, slave labor, whatever it is, out in other parts of the world, and we can export those opportunities, take advantage of slave labor and lower labor costs around the world on a pattern that the capitalists will do because that's where they realize the most money.
If the global market, the global market is unregulated,
it is.
If we leave it that way, that will happen. But the alternative is to also begin to find ways to regulate global markets with global democratic institutions, global oversight institutions. And you know what? Some of them are already there.
Okay, thank you.
We already got them. IMF is there.
Which is?
The International Monetary Fund, the World Trade Organization. They are currently being used. They don't represent corporations and banks. They represent governments, free governments. But right now, those governments are under the sway of big money.
Everywhere.
So they're using their influence to do stuff that pleases the banks. But there's no reason why the G7, the G20, no reason why the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, no reason why the World Trade Organization cannot be used by the governments, the democratic governments, who are its constituents, to actually help regulate the global economy, if that's what the governments of those states and the people of those states want. Right now, people look at those institutions, the Bretton Woods institutions that came out of World War II, they look at them as in the hands of the banks, in the hands of the corporations,
and they are.
But they weren't after World War II when they were created. They were created as instruments of the Marshall Fund, of re-democratizing a ruined world coming out of the war. They were seen as instruments of democracy, not just instruments of finance capital. They have become instruments of finance capital because the governments that control them permit that.
Okay, and it comes from the government there. Yeah, you got that. So it came in, Mr. Reagan did that in something around 1980 or so. We had a kind of golden era in the United States from 45 to the end of the 60s or 70s, where things were working. A guy could work for one job, get all his kids through college, everything worked. Now they got to do double duty in terms of that now. But it began around 1980. It seems to me a downslide. And Miss Thatcher said, Tina, there is no alternative to a market fundamentalist kind of philosophy that was on front and center and has been in the place for the last 35 years or so, don't you think?
Yeah, but let's take let's take a historical perspective.
Please.
I think Thatcher and Reagan in the 1980s probably had a point. We've been through, as you said, 30 or 40 years of a strong democratic welfare state. There had been some bureaucratization with that.
Yeah.
There had been some paternalization with that. There had been a kind of dependency among the poor that they don't have to worry about it, let the government take care of it. And it was probably healthy for, say, a dozen years to get a little dose of, let's go back to
35.
hang on,
sorry.
I'm being historical here.
Okay.
10 or 12 years, it was, we go in cycles.
Yeah.
So I want to say, that wasn't all bad. There was some bad stuff, but it was probably useful to remember that government isn't our daddy and mommy, that we have our own responsibilities, that families have responsibilities, that you can breed dependency if, you give too many handouts and so on. And that was useful. But it's now gone on for near 40 years, not just among Republicans, but among Democrats, because unfortunately the Clinton administration, I was associated with it, they were the ones to be complicit in this catering to business, catering to privatization, and the fact is we are big time ready for a return to stronger democratic interventionism. Not more paternalism, not more bureaucracy, but more democratic oversight, more social insight into the needs we have as a public, not just the needs we have as consumers. And by the way, I think that's in fact happening. I think you're going to see in the coming years here a new government and a new Congress in the United States that whatever else you think of them will be thinking again about the role of government, the role of democratic institutions, the role of regulation and oversight in helping balance this relationship between the individual entrepreneurial economy and the social responsibility of public citizens. And we need a balance, and what we got for the last 30 or 40 years is something radically unbalanced towards radical individualism, even anarchism, global anarchic markets, and we now, I think, are on our way to moving back. But in order to do it, we have to understand that to be a consumer is not enough on the way to citizenship. Citizens and consumers are two different breeds. Citizens say, what do we need as a community? Consumers say, what do I want? And we need to move back to a society where citizens asking what's good for the whole community are in charge, not consumers who are saying, give me this, give me that, here's what I want, damn the hindermost.
Dave Corton says corporations rule the world. When corporations rule the world, he points to the modern experience and the situations there. It's the large corporations that are really setting the template for planet Earth. The sovereign states are very often bypassed and so forth, and you got to, what's going to cause, and it's all locked within an international now because everything's interconnected internationally. What are their standards? We don't have standards that have the body of international law.
Now
Or the labor organization.
Here's the question I ask. Why has that happened?
Why has there not been a global
Why do corporations rule the world, I ask myself. Why do corporations rule the world?
Okay, thank you, yeah.
Is it because they have gone out and destroyed democratic governments and shot citizens and said, we're the new dictators, we're taking over? Or is it because citizens have relinquished their democratic responsibilities and in effect privatized and said, go ahead and do it? I know a lot of people in business. I know a lot of corporate CEOs. I've been on corporate retreats. I've talked to business. I don't know any business, well, there's probably a couple of them, but I don't know too many businessmen who want to run the world. Most of them want to run their corporations and make a profit. And most of them will say to you, we need and want democratic institutions to do their part.
Really?
We don't want to be altruists. We don't want to worry about social responsibility. We want to worry about the profits of our shareholders. That's our job, and that is their job. Social responsibility is the job of society. Political oversight is the responsibility of the polis. Citizen responsibility is the responsibility of citizens. And we have, in effect, defaulted as citizens and left it to the corporations, which is why even a lot of these good-natured corporations are saying, gee, maybe we better get some social responsibility because citizens have given up their task. It's up to us to take back the reins. if we take back the reins and a corporation tries to say, no, you can't do that, then we fight them. But I think you will find most people, most CEOs, most managers, they are as unhappy with the world that's been created by corporations out of control as we are. They've got kids, they breathe the polluted air, they see the unclean water, they see global warming, they see oil dependency, and it's as bad for them and their kids as it is for us. They need democracy every bit as much as we do. So I don't see this as a kind of conspiracy of dictatorial corporations trying to take away our liberty. I see the problem that we have given away our liberty under the influence of Thatcher and Reagan and the Chicago School, thinking that we're better off as consumers than as citizens. And I'm here to say we're not, and that we need to be citizens first and consumers second if we're going to have a balance between democracy and the market.
Very well said. But on the one hand, if you got people, I mean, the globalization process with the, let's say, you got a couple layers here. You got one, outsourcing to other areas of the world where you can take advantage. The corporations are thinking globally. They think globally. They don't even necessarily think of sovereign states except entities to be got around tax havens, that kind of thing. So they're thinking globally. The citizens, by and large, are thinking locally.
Very good point.
So
and you're right about that, and that's a problem. Because here the corporations are right and the citizens are wrong. That is to say, we live in a global, interdependent world where all the forces and challenges we face are forces of interdependence.
Interdependence.
Not independence, interdependence. When you and I were growing up, I worried at least about the West New York virus. Now I worry about the West Nile virus. When I grew up, I listened to WNYC in New York Station. Now we're on the World Wide Web. We live in a global society. Terrorism, war, crime, markets are all global. All the challenges are global.
And the
corporations here's the rub.
are at that
here's
level.
the rub. And they understand that. So they're
And
there.
they're good at it.
But here's the problem. Here's the problem. All of the democratic institutions and civic and political remedies we have, all the ways in which we respond to these global interdependent challenges are locked up in the 19th century. The old nation state, the old sovereign state. And so we have old-fashioned 19th century nation states trying to deal with interdependent challenges. The corporations long ago figured out that wasn't going to work, so they severed their ties to the nation state and they went global. But we have not allowed democracy to go global. So to put it simply, until we either democratize globalization or globalize democracy, globalization is going to mean anarchy. It's going to be run by money and corporations and the forces of anarchy. And democracy is going to be left out because democracy is still inside the nation-state box. All the challenges, the global economy is outside the nation-state box. That's the problem.
Wonderful thing. That's a very interesting thing. I wonder if I could just back off a little bit and try and look at history a little bit, right? And we had, like, for about 1,000 years after Rome in Europe, we had identity got by the people making up the various entities, largely through dynastic association. We had the assize courts, we had feudalism, agricultural based. Along came 1776. For a convenient date, there was heralding an industrial development, which was going to move into a new order. You had the Scottish Enlightenment. You had the Revolution happening. There were 4 million people in the United States when they made the Revolution only. Virgin continent, everything. There was no mass manufacturing. There was no, the Industrial Revolution was just starting. The steam engine was invented. There was something in terms of the development of the economy that was changing and heralding something new. The people from the United States of America informed the French. They made a revolution. They overthrew the dynastic head. There was an order. The Ancien regime had been in place for 1,000 years, but there was in the zeitgeist, or in the ontology, there was a change coming that was going to be transformative in a major way, and that was called industrialization, and the modern world was born. Nation state, national identity. Now, do you think we're in another moment?
There's a question hiding in this.
Yes,
I knew somewhere in this good account there's a question hiding.
That's a historical thing, and now are we in a similar thing? We made a revolution 230 years ago in the United States of America, set up a constitution, political system. We had town meetings. We had all this sort of thing, and we had it within the thing which fit with the change that was in the air then. Do you think the system that we have, the United States, let's say the world order, World Trade Organization, and our assuming a legitimate order in terms of the world, that we may be confronted now on this planet with an alternative, that we're tied into like an ancien regime commitment to institutions that have come out of history when the context by which all these institutions should be considered in terms of looking to the future needs and heralds something new, that the old institutions that we're all connected with are out of date, that we, the United States, in our thinking, might represent in a certain sense a modern day ancient regime that has to think things new.
To put it in terms of concise benchmarks,
if you could.
If in the 15th, 16th, and 17th century we moved into an era of nation states where independent, free nation states became the condition for the liberty, pursuit of happiness, equality, and security of peoples, and anyone who wanted to be free and enjoy the natural freedom they had by birth had to be a member of a nation state and exercising through democratic sovereignty some real power. If that became the formula for the next 300 years, today we live in a time when that formula seems to have run its course. Because the challenges today are no longer within national borders, but global.
Exactly.
Whereas the sovereign nation state remains within a border. So in a way, what we're looking at is the need for a new social contract.
Thank you.
The old social contract,
or cosmically
the old social contract said to individuals, you're free by nature. You're free to kill and to be killed. You're free to take what you want or have it taken from you. And most folks, as Thomas Hobbes pointed out, didn't much like that because that made life nasty, brutish, and short. And so they surrendered some of their natural liberty to one another to create institutions which secured their liberty. And it was nation states, independent nation states like the United States, like France, like England, that made that possible. But today we live in a world where individuals can no longer be secured by the sovereignty of the nation states they live in. In the United States, we learned that on 9/11. We learned it the hard way, because what 9/11 showed us is that a powerful hegemonic nation state cannot protect itself from the threats that come its way in an interdependent world, whether they're the threats of terrorism, whether they're the threats of AIDS, whether they're the threats of nuclear weapons, whether they're the threats of predatory capital, whether they're the threats of migration of labor across borders, obeying not the laws of the state, but the laws of the economy, which are global. We learned all that, which means we now are in a new moment where we need a new social contract, where nations need to come together and yield some of their sovereignty to secure common liberty and common security the way once individuals came together to yield some of their individual liberty to get it. And that's what we need. And that's tough because a lot of people like Bush, and I understand that, feel our sovereignty is our safety. Our sovereignty is our liberty. We've got to run things and control things ourselves or we're going to be in trouble. But the reality is, as Europe has proved, a place where for 300 years Germany and France were slaughtering each other in the name of their sovereignty, and today have yielded their sovereignty and secured 75 years of peace and liberty and economic prosperity. I remind you that today the euro is almost $1.50.
That's
if you want to see how pooled
They're
sovereignty
all
works,
buying up our real estate.
see how pooled sovereignty works. So the fact is, the time has come to renegotiate the social contract and to begin to think about what it means to live in a world of interdependence where the old sovereign state institutions and national frontiers don't work, and we need new transnational institutions, institutions of pooled sovereignty, new forms of cooperation across borders that allow us to meet all of the challenges coming at us across our borders.
Can we get at some of those by concentrating on human rights? Eleanor Roosevelt gave us a declaration in 1948. They're concentrating on human rights as a politically viable thing rather than just some
here's the problem with that, Harold. Here's the problem with human rights. Human rights takes us back to the first social contract. I mean, the human rights movement is a way of trying to get nation states to pay attention to the liberties and rights of individuals upon which the very notion of a nation state is premised. So I'm not sure it helps us so much get to the next, because what we're really saying is, even if you get your human rights inside of Burma, China, Cuba, Venezuela, or for that matter the United States, they're not fully recognized. Even if you got them, you still would face all of these global challenges. So human rights, even when secured nation by nation, are not secured internationally. This new social contract we're talking about, the social contract among nations, a social contract that pools sovereignty, that's what's going to be necessary in the new world to protect human rights. And so just talking about human rights without talking about the vehicle, the instruments by which we secure human rights is not going to do the job. So that language is important. It reminds us that all human institutions, whether they're sovereign or trans-sovereign, are there to protect our rights. but it doesn't really differentiate between the institutions the way I think we need to successfully realize our rights today.
You're coming out of political science. You worked for Mr. Dean, I think, Howard Dean.
Worked with Howard Dean. I worked for Howard Dean, and before that, of course, I worked for Bill Clinton, with Bill Clinton in the 1990s. I was foreign policy advisor to Howard Dean, and I'm still talking with Howard and the Democratic Party about some of these issues, some of these ideas.
But apart from that and everything, that sort of thing, when was it, when the phenomenon of Ross Perot. Ross Perot gets up on a television channel and says, if enough people get me on the ballot, I'm going to run for president as an independent. And he ran, and he got nearly 20% of the vote in that thing. They were stressing things like town hall meetings. Do you remember the people felt they had a sense of participating and so forth? Do you think there's anything to be said for a possible transition at the political level? Let's say there's political, there's economics. At the political level, there's, in the parlance of political science and people think, there is a term that seems to be part of a progressive vision, if that's what we're looking for, something called participatory democracy, rather than just mere representative democracy.
Well, particularly
is there any point in talking about that?
There is.
Look at Mr. Perot, and then are there examples in the world?
If you'll forgive me, let's not look at Mr. Perot just for
because
I only say that for many people that will be a diversion. They'll start talking about Perot.
But let me finish. No, but let me finish the question. Let me
democracy.
finish the question now with him, because I'll talk with somebody else who we've had some mutual experience with, if I may. Is Libya, the country of Libya. Country of Libya, Muammar Gaddafi. I've been there, you've been there, you've talked with them. And they have there, the whole country is divided up into people's congresses. It's like town hall meetings. It's participatory democracy that they propose rather than representative democracy. Is it out of the question to think that part of a vision of a progressive the world needs is that there will be participation on the part of the masses within the political process rather than having it all delegated to representatives, as we have done since 1776.
Well, to link this question to what we've just been talking about, the need for a new social contract, a social contract among nations that yields some national sovereignty in return for cooperative action to meet the interdependent problems we face, I would say that the way to get there, the road there, is, as you describe, a road that runs bottom up, not top down.
Yes, thank you.
We look at the world federalists talk about a world government, United Nations, some kind of a world parliament. I think that's the wrong way around. You've got to build it bottom up. If you want to have anything like meaningful international governance, you need to have something in the way of meaningful international citizenship. Meaningful international civil society, bottom up, which means you've got to have participatory institutions, you've got to have civic and citizen cooperation across nations on the citizen-to-citizen basis. It's got to come bottom up. The Tocquevilles came to America in the 1830s and said, the great thing about American liberty is that it's municipal, it's local. Our democracy starts locally and works.
We had those town hall meetings, didn't we?
That's the way.
That's what they've got in Libya, for instance.
That's the way it needs to work. And we need, if we're looking for new forms of global governance, we need to look bottom up. We need to ask, how can you create global forms of citizenship? How can you create transnational forms of civic cooperation? Some of these interesting NGOs that are around, like Transparency International, Amnesty International, Doctors Without Borders, they have become kind of generic non-governmental organizations that allow people in many different countries to pursue a common civic agenda. They are, to me, a better building block than, say, the UN or some global governance institution.
Don't want to throw the UN out.
I'm not throwing it down, but I'm throwing it out. But I'm saying those are top-down. We need to operate bottom-up. We need to create the foundation for global cooperation among governments by first creating global civic institutions that involve citizens in a participatory way, to come back to participatory democracy, to make this happen.
That was part of Mr. Perot's appeal, I believe. There was a sense of participation on the part of people, and that we don't seem to have. There's systems in place that don't serve well. On the economic front, do you think there's a need for the input mix in Tom Jefferson's day? 10% of the production was anything other than human labor. There was a great deal of labor applied.
A lot of slave labor.
Well, there was slave labor.
We don't want to forget that it was
and
slave
that
labor.
Wasn't slave, it was indentured.
It wasn't also pretty. It wasn't also
pretty. No, it wasn't pretty. It had a little hatchet. You didn't have any mass production yet. But the shift in terms of the input to production through time, it's been charts you can see, it is increasingly something other than human labor. But all our economic theory, from Schumpeter to Van Hayek to Marx to Keynes to Friedman and so forth, they're all based certainly in a certain sense, and our basic policy grounding statement is the Employment Act of 1936. We're going to distribute income to the masses of the people within the society through their labor participation, or we have some systems where we do it by need from the New Deal and so forth, but the labor theory of value informs all economic theory. Is there any point in trying to think about how you have to democratize some ownership of capital assets as an instrument by which we form capital, and also an instrument by which we distribute income to people as technology and other than human labor becomes increasingly responsible for production?
The first thing we have to
remember. And again, the example of Libya is one that might be worth considering. I know you've met with him and talked with him.
The first thing we have to remember is that the labor-based economy has moved from there to a capital-based economy, meaning capital machinery, industrial machinery, and so on, to today an information economy.
That's
and if
right.
you want to know what the fundamental basis of wealth in the modern world and prosperity is today, it's information, it's knowledge, which is why the media and the communications industries are so absolutely vital, and their bastardization, their corruption, the ownership by monopolies of them, their use for purely entertainment features are really devastating because we live in a world infantilized. Yes, we live in a world where information is not just vital to democracy and vital to trade and vital to our living, but is also the basis for the productive economy. I mean, and that's why information societies can catch up in a big hurry. India and China have done a lot in the information area, which is why they've modernized so quickly. They're doing in 10 years what it took us 100 years to do.
We can leapfrog.
Because of their mastery of the information economy.
Okay.
That, of course, changes the view of labor a little bit, too, because people who are information workers, whether they're computer programmers or movie makers or designers, image makers, they have a powerful role to play in the modern information economy that in some ways is like the owners of industrial capital was in the 19th century.
Or Voltaire
so that changes.
in his day.
So I say that as background to wanting to agree with you, but also condition that agreement by saying you're right, we have to democratize ownership, we have to democratize labor, but how you do that in an information economy is going to look a little different than how you might have done that in an industrial economy or even a agricultural economy or a slave economy in the early days. So we need to think about it in terms of what it means and how do you democratize information and access to information. The internet seems in some ways to be a very good thing, but it turns out that software platforms, search engines, web browsers are crucial to controlling that information, and the people who control those are the same old media corporations, or in some cases new media corporations, where there is still monopoly. So the seeming architecture of the internet, which is very democratic, every man his own blog, every man can do his own thing, in fact is still controlled because of browsers, because of servers, because of software, is still controlled by the few, not the many. So what appears to be a very democratic new technology turns out to be a little less democratic than we thought it was because of these features. So I mean, I really want to agree with you to say we need to think about how to democratize it, but to do it, we have to understand the character of the new economy.
Yeah, I have to understand the character of the new economy and that. But and I saw a piece, maybe you could tell me what you think. Krugman writes well, it seems to me. And he said, he had a thing, I can't understand it, but he said the growth from 2003 to 2005 in the American economy, that the growth, beyond inflation, that sort of thing, it didn't even go, the real growth, didn't even go to the upper 1% only. It didn't even go, it got a little bit in the upper 1/10 of 1%. But the real growth went to those that are the 100th of 1% of the people within the American economy, where it was all going. The growth was going, the way things are structured now. The capital assets responsible for production are owned by a small group, and they set the template. That sets the template for all our institutions, including our universities, our think tanks. They set the template. What they allow would be allowed within the system. And it seems to me, it seems almost like as if we're on a feudal estate, serfs on a feudal estate by the few who own all the capital assets that are increasingly responsible for production.
Well, I don't know how we want to label it, but it's certainly true that inegalitarianism, inequality, has been growing since the 1970s, actually, since that so-called golden age of the Great Society and so on. Up until the late 1960s, America was becoming more egalitarian.
It was indeed. The middle class was really growing,
was shrinking, the middle class was growing. For the last 30 or 40 years, first it stagnated, and now the separation of very rich and very poor is growing, and people in the middle class are finding themselves a little less well off year by year. This is the first time in the history of America where, and I'm sure many of your viewers will sympathize with this, people fear their children will be less well off than they are.
Yeah,
Up until now it's always been,
that's very
I
against
work
the
hard,
American
my
spirit.
kids, you know, my kids are going to be better off.
Yeah.
Nowadays they're really worrying, my God, the kids are going to be worse off, and it's possible that will happen. How we can have growing inequality in a society that is growingly prosperous, because the overall abundance and prosperity and wealth of our society continues to grow, particularly because of our edge in the information economy, and that's an area in which we continue to be very, very dominant, whether it's Hollywood in the making of images or Bill Gates in the making of software. The fact is we dominate the world of information and technology in very powerful ways. Not so much the service economy anymore, but the information economy. We are absolutely crucial, and yet despite that, which should be a democratizing force, there is more and more inequality. But I would trace that back again to the surrender of our democratic institutions. That's again because we're privatizing everything. We're privatizing health. People are talking about privatizing Social Security, privatizing education. Privatization means more opportunity for those who are well off and more inequality
and they're
for the
taking
system.
full advantage
You can see a direct correlation between the growth of inequality and the growth of privatization, step by step. Take the gated community today. Gated communities gated communities in the American gated communities in the American suburbs is a place where Americans can secede from the public sector. They can say, I'm sick of being in New York or LA or Chicago where they don't spend enough on housing and on policing and on sanitation. I'm going into my gated community. I'm going to stop paying taxes to New York or Chicago. I'll pay big time to a private owners association. We will hire private police, private schools, private sanitation,
armies like Blackwater,
private armies to support us, and they will be a little mini democratic republic inside a vast inegalitarian state which no longer affords most citizens those opportunities. We cannot afford to let the wealthy cede from the rest of the country, not only because we can't afford it for the poor, but because it's a phony bargain. In fact, those people are depending on public services. Take Blackwater. We privatized them. Who trained all those Blackwater? These Blackwater guys are all ex-SEALs, you know, ex-Army officers and Rangers who have been trained by American dollars, just like the airlines. All these pilots, where do these pilots all get trained?
I don't know. But
U.S. Air Force. U.S. Air Force. Then they go into the private sector.
That's right.
And, you know, our tax dollars disappear down a black hole. So in fact, the segregation of our society into rich and poor, the secession of the rich into gated communities is something that's not just bad for our economy and bad for our democracy, but it's bad for all Americans, including the rich ones. And what's interesting, of course, is they find they secede into these gated communities, and you know what? Drugs, crime, juvenile delinquency follow them. Their kids go out and shoot up the schoolyard because they're so messed up by what they're watching on television. You can't run away. We live in a world where people are still trying to build walls, but we proved in Berlin, we proved over and over again that walls don't work in an interdependent world. We are busy building walls where we should be building bridges.
We only just got started, Benjamin Barber. We could talk for 15 hours. We're almost out of time. Yeah, I think we could make some money, Ben, if we go into, in the feudal days, you used to have the castle keep to which the people would retreat when the masses are coming. We could start building castle keeps in those gated. We just got started. Thanks for your support for public access. We appreciate that.
Thank you so much,
and
Harold.
For such a well-led life.
Well,
and for such a
congratulations for you for spending so many years doing important and wonderful interviews and work for the public who have it free through public access.
Public access, it's an institution to be vouchsafed. I think the citizens should give support to that idea because it's a little light or candle in an otherwise dark media picture. They're still pushing mergers and acquisitions to the FCC. I see. Just scratched the surface as a world-class scholar. Happy very much for you to come in. Glad you could find the time. Your pleasure to have had his perceptions. Tune in. We're coming back again tomorrow to talk more about the human condition and some of the things that might improve the same. Thank you very much. Thanks a lot for coming in. See you tomorrow. So we've run it down and everything like that. But I